Hey, what's up you guys? It's Dorothy and welcome back to my channel. I know I kind of got the sniffles a few chapters ago. I was getting a little bit emotional with how everything was going, and a little bit last video too at the beginning of that chapter. So now I've got the sniffles because my eyes started to water, and when that happens, you know, your nose starts to run a little bit too. But anyways, we're gonna go into chapter 35 of 5 Survive by Holly Jackson, which means after this video we will only have 5 more chapters left and our bonus chapter, which isn't really a chapter, it's just like a bonus read. But let's get right into this video. This video may contain sensitive topics and foul language. If you do not wish to continue, please click off of the video now. You have been warned. Chapter 35. Put the knife down, Oliver. Raina's voice rang out louder than the screeching guitars and the thunderous rifle crack drums. Red raised her chin to the tip of the knife, only a few inches from her neck, shaking in Oliver's grip. His eyes were wild, too much black, too much red where white should be, bloodshot where the sweat had trickled in. She didn't move, hands still raised. Red had known Oliver all her life, but she didn't know this version of him, the person that Red Dot had turned him into, pushing him to the farthest point. But it must have always been there, somewhere inside this Oliver, dormant, waiting until he was needed. He didn't even look like himself anymore, hair greasy with sweat, pushed back in a chaotic clump, skin red and blotchy. Those puppet strings making his head hang sideways on his neck again, and he studied Red back. Her eyes trailed down the knife in his hands, and the thing was, Red wasn't sure. She wasn't sure this was just an act or to get her to do what he wanted. There was a knife in his hands, and part of Red believed he would use it if he had to. He'd thrown her out of the RV once to save himself. She was expendable to him, disposable, and here she stood in Oliver's mind between him and survival. There wasn't a chance. Fine, Red said darkly, not loud enough over the music, but Oliver would read the word on her lips. He bared his teeth in a faltering smile that didn't fit his face. He'd won again. Now, he barked, the knife moving up and down with his voice. Red inhaled. Can I at least get some clothes to change into first? She gestured with her head to the overhead cupboards above the sofa, Maddie's case inside with the both of their things. No, not you, Oliver said. You might use it as a distraction to communicate with the sniper somehow. Hands where I can see them. I'm not working with the sniper, Oliver, Red snapped back. I'm the witness. They're here to kill me. Except they didn't, did they? When they had the chance, Oliver's eyes left her for a second. Simon, you go. Get some of Red's clothes out of Maddie's case. Simon stiffened, looking instead at Red. It's okay, she nodded, and her arms were still raised, as she wasn't sure she could feel them anymore, fizzing like they were made of static. Red missed the quiet sizzle of the walkie-talkie. Simon walked 3 steps over to the sofa and stood up on it, the plastic creaking under his shifting weight as he opened the cupboard, ducking his head to swing the door fully open. He reached up, the angry wasp sound of the zipper of Maddie's bag. Red stuff should be on top, Maddie called. Simon cocked one finger to let her know he heard. He reached aside, came back with his hands clasped around a pair of pants, one leg flicking itself up and around his arm. Black jeans, Simon called, voice barely audible, trapped inside the cupboard, while Red only had 2 pairs of pants, 1 pair of shorts with her, and she was wearing one of those. She was glad Simon hadn't gone for the shorts. As hot it was in this RV, exposed skin would feel like a target glowing in the night. Simon reached in with the other arm, shoulder rolling and rustled inside the bag, picking up one item that Red couldn't see, shaking his head and putting it back to select another. He pulled away, shutting the cupboard door, his elbow, and jumping down. Here, he said to Red, coming over, handing her clothes. No, Oliver over-interpreted, blocking Simon's way with one arm. On the floor. Simon checked with Red. She nodded. With what choice did she have? There was a knife to her throat. Simon dropped the ripped jeans and a black crumpled up at her feet, and the top he'd chosen, a long-sleeved t-shirt in the dark, plummy red. It had been her mom's once. Red's your color, Simon said to her over the music, an awkward closed-mouthed smile on his face. Was he trying to make her feel better with that smile, or was he masking something else because he also thought she was a mole? No, Simon couldn't. He knew her, and yet he could have been the one who voted for her to die. But she wasn't dead, and that was the new problem. Red, come on, Oliver shouted, dipping his head to indicate the clothes on the floor. At least let her go into the bathroom to change. Arthur stepped forward, tendon sticking up under the tan skin of his neck, not quite like puppet strings, but close. He was angry, Red could tell, or scared, or both. Arthur couldn't think she had anything to do with this at all, could he? No, he'd stood by her all night, dragged her away from the Red Dot, held her when The shock set in. Oliver swung the knife, pointed it at him until Arthur retreated one step. No, Oliver said. If we leave her alone, she might get a message to the sniper somehow. She has to stay where I can see her. It's fine, Arthur, Red called, fingers too sweaty and swollen as they worked the top button of her shirt down. It's fine. As the knife returned to her, followed by Oliver's eyes, what a ridiculous word this was. Fine, she was undressing at knife point, and there was a sniper outside, and she was supposed to be dead. But she was fine, you know. Arthur shook his head. He knew it wasn't fine, but he stepped back all the same, de-escalating the tension, easing slightly in Oliver's shoulders as he watched Red undo the rest of her buttons. Here, Maddie, Red said, pulling the blue and yellow flannel shirt off her arms. Standing there in a bra and jeans, she chucked the shirt past Oliver's head, and Maddie caught it, clutching it to her chest. Red picked up the t-shirt from the floor, pulled it over her head. She reached her arms through the ends of the sleeves and pulled the material down over her stomach. Jeans, Oliver barked. Come on, quick, before he wonders what we're up to. Red kicked off her sneakers, using each foot to pry the other off. Oliver bent forward, knife still raised, and collected them in one hand, passing them over to Maddie, who started to slip off her own shoes. Red dropped her eyes and unbuttoned her jeans, pulled down the zipper. She peeled the jeans down, the dark gasoline stain sticking to her knees, clinging to her pale skin. But she pushed, and they gave, falling, bunching around her ankles and stepping out of them. Red stood in this RV in her underwear and socks, and she looked up at the others. She wasn't ashamed to be standing here in her underwear. Red knew real shame, and this wasn't it. Real shame was killing your mom and having to live with it, knowing that she died, and the last thing you ever said to her was that you hated her. If Red survived that, she could survive this. She stared around at the others, daring them to look at her back in the eye. Could they put a stop to this? If Arthur, Raina, and Simon all stepped up, could they stop Oliver from making Maddie go through with this? There were 3 of them, but Oliver was the one with the weapon, and he was probably the only one who would use it. Or maybe that wasn't the reason at all. Maybe they didn't trust her either. Thought she was working with the sniper, what Red did, except she was still lying to them. Oliver scooped up the light blue jeans and passed them over to Maddie. Go get changed in the bathroom, he urged his sister over a new song, just starting, notes steadily climbing in threes, entering through Red's ears, biting at her nerves and her exposed legs. Maddie closed the bathroom door behind her. The last thing Red saw was the look of numb shock in her eyes. Were they really doing this? Red grabbed her black jeans from the floor and slipped them on. There were rips on one knee and up the thigh of the other leg. She hadn't bought them that way. They were just old. Maddie and Oliver's mom had bought her these ones. Maddie's shoes, Red shouted at Oliver. She hadn't packed any others. He kicked Maddie's white sneakers over, and Red wiggled her feet inside. No need to undo the laces. Maddie hated when she put shoes on like that. You'll break the backs, she always said, but Red didn't think she'd mind just this once. The song escalated, high notes on the guitar cascading all around her, and then building again, creeping up on a scale. You okay? Raina mouthed to her across the RV. Red nodded just slightly so Oliver wouldn't see. The knife wasn't as close anymore, but it was still there in his grip, pointing at her throat. People came undone when you stuck a knife in a spot, didn't they? But it wouldn't really matter where a rifle got you, would it? Anywhere you'd come undone around it, like the scattered puzzle of Dawn's head. The bathroom door opened soundlessly, buried under the song, and Maddie stepped out in Red's flannel shirt and her jeans, dark stains on the knees. She had on Red's tattered sneakers too, the laces done up neatly, double knotted. Good. Oliver beckoned her over. Okay, do you have a hair tie? He shouted into her ear. You need to tie yours back in a ponytail, the same height as Red's. Maddie always had a spare hair tie on her wrist, sometimes more actually. Red often borrowed them, never gave them back because they all got lost somehow. Maddie pulled up the sleeve of Red's shirt, revealing a black hair tie sinking into the flesh of her wrist. She rolled the band into the position over the base of her thumb, and fingers turning to study Red's hair, she gathered her own up, running her fingers through, pulling strands to the crown of her head. She secured the hair tie around the ponytail once, twice, 3 times, and pulled it tight. Oliver looked between the 2 of them, Red and Maddie, again frantically, eyes narrowing. Not quite right, he shouted. Yours is too long. Knife is still in hand. Oliver backed up to the table, reaching for the scissors with his bare hand. He didn't ask Maddie first. He spun her around, the heels of his hand on her shoulders, and he grabbed the length of her ponytail with the knife. With his knife hand, he opened the scissors, positioned them about 3 inches up from the ends of Maddie's hair, and he snipped It wasn't clean cut, sliding through the opening of the scissors and closing them again and again until it was hacked off, uneven, but Oliver seemed pleased with it. Shards of Maddie's light brown hair scattered to the floor. They glittered not quite as much as the glass had, but they still held the light. Oliver moved her back to study her again, dropping the scissors. The scissors, they were a weapon, too right. Could Red get to them? And then what? She couldn't stab Oliver Lavoy with them. She could threaten to, but he'd know it was an empty threat, and his might not be. Not rock, paper, scissors, but scissors, knife, rifle. Scissors lost every time in that game. Yours is too neat, Oliver shouted. Red's hair is messy. Can you pull some of the bits out in the front and lumps up at the top of your head? Maddie nodded, testing out wispy strands of her hair framed from her face like Red's bangs, pulling the clumps in the ponytail so they stuck up on her head better, Oliver shouted, and the smile was back, that one that didn't belong. Perfect. He gave Maddie a shake on the shoulders. You can do this, you know. He didn't wait for her to disagree. He walked past Red, knife gripped hard in his hand, circling the kitchen counter where the music was loudest. He opened the lid of the saucepan and reached in, removing 2 phones. One with the marble orange case. He thumbed at the screens, probably checking the battery levels. Okay, he shouted over the noise. Take your phone and Raina's. Actually, take Simon's too. He's on a different network. He pulled out a 3rd phone. You keep driving until you find a house or some help, or until the first bar of signal appears on one of these phones. He bundled the iPhones up in one hand and walked over, passing them to Maddie. She nodded, slipping 2 into her back pockets, 1 in the front. Oliver was blocking her. Red couldn't see Maddie's face, her eyes, but she could imagine the fear in them. Was this really going to happen? Look at me, Maddie, Oliver barked, reaching his spare hand out, knocking a finger under her chin. You can do this. Walk calmly out the door. Turn to the side as soon as you can. That's where you and Red look most alike in profile. Walk to Dawn, take the keys out of his hand, then straight into the truck, shut the door, start the engine, back up, and then turn and drive the hell out of here. Not fast while you're still in view, but once you're past those trees, you put your foot down, understood? Drive as fast as you can into some signal or to a house and a landline, and when you call the police, remember to tell them it's an active shooter and they need to send officers right away. Do you know where to send them? Oliver shifted and Red could finally see Maddie. She looked frozen, welded to the floor of the RV, a quiver in her lower lip as she searched Oliver's face for the right answer. McNair Cemetery Road. Simon was the one to answer. That's the road we turned off down here. I remember. They'll find us if you tell them that. Tell them to look for headlights. Maddie nodded, swallowing her bottom lip now, eyes glazed with terror, like she couldn't even listen. The words were just noise batteries against her ears. Maddie, it was Arthur now, stepping around the swell of music. I really don't think you should do this. You shouldn't. It's too risky. There must be another way. Red. Arthur looked at the back of her desperation in the pinch of a mouth. Red shook her head, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes to see Maddie. This scared her. Maddie, don't go, she said. Don't do it. You don't have to. Shut up, you two, Oliver roared, puppet head rolling loose on his neck as he whipped back to Maddie. Don't listen to them. They don't understand. This is going to work, okay? Maddie, Madeline, look at me. It's going to work and you will be fine. You're going to save us all. You're going to save us. It'll work. It's a mom plan, a win-win. Oliver's voice was raw from shouting, cracking at the edges just like his smile. You get out of here and call for help, and once you're safely gone, we can let the sniper know he will still have Red. They will protect us in the meantime. She's obviously worth something to them. But not to anyone else, clearly. Red once thought Oliver looked at her like a spare sister. She'd been wrong about that, about the second word, though the one that mattered. Don't go, Maddie, Arthur said, and there was tears in his eyes, too. Don't, Red. Don't, Red. She was trying, but Maddie was listening to Oliver, and he had held the knife. Maddie, Red cried. Oliver, can we think about the Raina began? It's okay, Maddie shouted above their voices and the music, nodding her head too fast, eyes rattling with it. It's okay, everyone. I can do it. I'm going to get help for you. I promise I can do it. I can save you all. You don't have to, Red yelled back, just because excuse me. Oliver turned on her, brandishing the knife. She made up her mind. Red, stop trying to manipulate her. It's okay, Red, Maddie said, staring right at her, eyes locking on. I can do it. I want to do it. I trust Oliver. I'll save us all. I can. I'm not scared. But she was so scared. Red had never wanted to see that look on her best friend's face, and knowing she'd probably never forget it. Right, Oliver screamed above the song. I'm going to turn the music off, and I want the rest of you to be absolutely silent. Don't say a thing. Red, keep your mouth shut and keep your hands where I can see them. Maddie, have you got the phones? Are you ready? She nodded. Arthur was shaking his head. "Okay," Oliver shouted. "Go stand by the door." Maddie did, her feet dragging against the floor like she was hoping the RV would grow up and over them and trap her inside so she didn't have to go, but she'd chosen Oliver just like Red had countless times tonight. He was the natural leader here, big brother, and Red couldn't compete with it. Maddie waited by the door, fingers raised above the handle, shaking, and she looked just like Red. When you see yourself in one of those dressing room mirrors, see what you'd look like from behind. Maddie's hair was only a shade or two darker, but the night would hide that. It had to, because if Maddie was actually going to do this, then it had to work. Oliver had to be right, and Red had to be wrong. Had to. Should Red say goodbye, tell Maddie she loved her, just in case she had last words before she regretted them every day since? She could go do it right this time. No, because they weren't last words, and Maddie couldn't think like that either. This had to work. Maddie was going to drive out of here, and she would be fine. She was going to save them all. Maddie looked back over her shoulder and told her as much as she could with her eyes. Oliver pulled his phone out of the pan and tapped on the screen. The music cut out, and air hissing in the absence. No, that was the static, back at last. Filling Red's ears, she breathed it in. Oliver rounded the kitchen counter, standing between Maddie and Red, knife still gripped in his hand. He looked at his sister and nodded his head just once. Red, Oliver said loudly, not looking at her. "Where are you going?" Then he nodded at Maddie again. Her lips were gone, sucked back into her face as she pushed down the handle, and the door swung open, inviting the dark night. "No," Red whispered, and Oliver shot her a look, knife raised. Maddie turned, bowed her head, and walked down the stairs, the night taking her away. She reached the road, steps crunching beneath her, and pushed the door of the RV shut behind her. "Come," Oliver whispered, grabbing Red by the elbow, dragging her with him to the front of the RV. "Where the fuck has Red just gone?" he shouted, voice grating in his throat and Red's ear. The others gathered in behind, just 5 of them now. Simon leaped over the driver's seat to see. Arthur pressed in on Red's other side. The muscles in his face were flickering, a tortured look in his eyes. As he stared out the windshield, he leaned forward, hands fidgeting against his legs, nails digging in. "This will work," Red wanted to tell him. It had to, because the alternative was unthinkable. They were wrong. Oliver was right. He had to be right, holding on to her elbow, knife in the other hand, eyes focused ahead. Red caught movement in her periphery and whipped around, staring out the windshield into the night. There was Maddie, Red's blue and yellow shirt glowing in the headlights. She was walking toward the truck, toward the driver's side door, slowly, every step measured and calm, pressing into the road and peeling up. There was something dangling from Maddie's left hand, the keys. She had the keys. This was going to work. Red was wrong. She was wrong, and she didn't need to have to say any last words at all, because it was working. Her heart was in her throat, beating so hard she couldn't hear the static anymore. She was wrong. It was going to work. Maddie was just a few feet from the truck now, movement in her neck, ponytail swinging as she glanced up. "Go on," Oliver whispered, guiding her forward. Maddie stopped. She reached out for the door handle. Crack. That is the end of chapter 35. I will see you guys in the next video after I cry, because I think we all know just what happened. So